Now, I'd like to open the meeting to the sharing of testimonies of healing through Christian Science. Donna from Oregon, go ahead.
Hi. I want to share with you how much I enjoyed the Saturday night service. It was so beautiful and calming. The only thing that would have made it better is if I could have been there in person. Sitting here listening reaffirmed very clearly just what Christmas is truly about. The focus was on Jesus instead of the commercialism of today. I'm so grateful to God that I have a church to attend that teaches the same things that Jesus taught. I'm also grateful for the practitioners, not just for the healings they so selflessly do, but for their teaching, wisdom, and understanding that they share with us. Thank you.
And thank you. And by the way, if you ever do end up in Plainfield, we would love to see you walk through the front doors of our church. Jeremy.
Very soon after arriving in this church, I was given a copy of the Dixon letter, which is available on our carousel. As soon as I read it, I had this sense that the work this church does is not to feel good, it is not busy work, and it definitely is not playing around. This work is done here for the betterment of mankind. There are some very real issues in the world, and without God and authentic Christian Science, I just felt like it was too much to think about. I felt it was too big for any person to be even concerned with, because what could we do about it? I'm so grateful that this church is showing me that we can indeed do something about it, and that by holding to the teachings of Christ Jesus and Mary Baker Eddy, I can do my part to make this world as God envisioned it. What a wonderful, empowering, positive force Christian Science is. With the lessons, discussions, forum, daily practitioner support, unity watches, and all this church offers, I no longer feel as though the wrong in the world is too much. I feel more and more that I am equipped to meet these claims and stamp them out. I'm sure I still have a ways to go, but to be this close to this feeling, knowing where I was 4 years ago, is just a wonderful blessing and a great healing. Being a member of this church has done so much more than save my life. It has given me a brand new, useful life that I thank God for every day. It's so humbling to be here. Thank you so much. And now I have a testimony from Joseph in Scotland.
Hello everyone, this is Joseph from Scotland. Well, I'm recording this on Christmas Day, and I'm very grateful. Someone gave me a gift of an office diary for the year 2017. Well, of course, immediately that brought up the idea of mortality, time marching on, and another year to be faced. So I decided to use this rather than looking at dates, but to keep my notes for the weekly Bible lesson. I'm really amazed at how my love for the Bible lesson has increased over the last few years. When I first discovered Christian Science many years ago, I had no interest in the Bible or the lesson. I was very interested in metaphysics, very interested in healing, but when it came to the Bible, I was, I'm not sure this is relevant. And I'm sure we all feel that sometimes. You know, in looking at the lesson for this coming week, I just glanced over the lesson as I was writing it in my new diary, preparing for it, and I'm very struck and touched again by some of the words in there, which are very uplifting. Shortly after doing that, I listened to our Queen's speech. Our Queen gives a yearly message at 3 o'clock, which is usually very bland and politically correct and doesn't usually say very much. This year, it sounded a little bit like a Christian Science sermon. She spoke about Jesus, and she spoke about the word inspiration. She told us the meaning of the word, where the word came from, and who inspires her in her life, and how we all can inspire others. It was a bit strange because I usually hear these things in listening to or reading Christian Science documentation, I don't usually hear them from the Queen, because we're always told that we're living in a multicultural society where Christianity has no relevance, and where, to be politically correct, you can't mention Christianity because by doing so you would immediately be insulting half the population, or at least not acknowledging their right, as they might not celebrate Christmas. But yet, here was a 90-year-old lady lecturing me and telling me the meaning and the background of the word inspiration as a spiritual quality, and how that's touched her, and how her greatest hero, or the person who's inspired her most, is Jesus. It was quite it was quite illuminating and incredibly moving, because it immediately, I suppose, put back in the mind of the country the meaning of Christmas. And I'm sure it's not only myself that was blessed by it. I don't know if the Queen's speech is available anywhere. They usually don't rebroadcast it, but I'm sure if you search for it on YouTube, or you could at least find the text of it, it's a very beautiful thing, very wonderful thing that she mentioned this year. Finally, the other thing I'm very grateful for, as well as the spirit of Christmas and the church and all the wonderful work that goes on here, I'm also very, very grateful regarding mental health. There's a lot of talk and a lot of people speaking about mental health at this time of year, with depression and sadness and despair. But strangely, one of the most prescribed drugs here, and I won't mention it by name, it doesn't deserve to be called what it appears to be, something which is an alternative apparently to traditional medicine and is now advertising itself as a cure. I was talking to an older member of my community here in Scotland, and they were reminding me about what it was like in my grandmother's generation, that this so-called cure for depression was a superstition, and it had to be found without looking for it in order for it to have efficacy. So in other words, it had no real power, it was superstitious, and now it's marketed all over the world as a cure for a very serious mental illness. And it just shows me again the ridiculous point of pharmaceutical medicine, and how it can never be what it claims to be, nor can it ever have any control over spirituality or over the spiritual realm. Well, that's all I wanted to say today, and I wish you all a very, very Merry Christmas.
Thank you to both of you. Linda from Pennsylvania, go ahead.
Good evening. Thank you for the readings on the scriptures this evening and the testimony so far. I am very thankful tonight for my year at Plainfield and the many opportunities and offerings to renew and reform my thinking. This is bringing me closer to God and strengthening my faith. This year, learning to live biblical precepts and how to make Christian Science practical has made me less critical and selfish, more patient, kind, and grateful. With practitioner support, I have experienced healings of illnesses, injuries, relationships, work, home, and of many fears, to name a few. I appreciate everyone who participates for all that is done here to bless the world, and look forward to the coming year. Thank you.
Thank you. Gary.
There's a statement in Science and Health that reads, "Final deliverance from error is not reached through paths of flowers." It made me very grateful for a lesson I learned early on after joining this church, and that is, there's no easy way to grow up. As a child, I attended Boston-affiliated Sunday schools, and by the time I came to Plainfield as a young adult, I was firmly convinced that the sole purpose of Christian Science was to enable us to live a life without problems. A path of flowers. Well, I remember having some very wonderful healings after I got here. Healings of health, of relationships, financial, mental, a lot of wonderful healings. And I knew that I had found the right practice of Christian Science when I founded this church and a practitioner in this church. But in the back of my mind, there was a nagging concern of why I was having these problems in the first place. I mean, what was wrong with me that I was having these problems? This isn't the way Christian Science was supposed to be. Well, I was relieved of that misconception by a practitioner in this church who taught me that it is not the purpose of Christian Science to make our lives problem-free. The purpose of Christian Science is to destroy the belief in sin and disease for mankind. And that through our prayers, we are to help ourselves and others be what God made, to be perfect as God is. And if we have problems, well, those are stepping stones to our spiritual growth. And in fact, it's impossible to grow spiritually without having problems to face, facing them, and growing. Facing and overcoming problems each day is not something to be avoided. In fact, I soon found that whenever I would face something that was wrong and take a strong stand, I would always meet resistance. The devil doesn't want to be destroyed. Anyway, once this revelation sank in for me, it made a wonderful difference in my life. I no longer condemn myself or get angry when I face a problem. And in fact, there came a period in there where I actually looked forward to problems because it meant that I was going to grow closer to God and feel His love even more. Well, I thank God for the help of our practitioners and for that particular practitioner. And I'm also grateful to Mrs. Eddy for faithfully giving us this clear and complete explanation of what life is really all about. I'm so grateful to be here tonight, and thank you again for those readings tonight.
Thank you. Luba from Ohio, go ahead.
Good evening. As the year comes to an end, I am so grateful for all that God and Christian Science has provided. What at times appeared impossible has become possible. I'm so grateful for this unfoldment. I am very grateful for all that Plainfield provides and to my most dedicated practitioner who continues patiently when I appear to stumble over the same error and for her healing work. Thank you so much for the readings tonight.
Thank you. Dede from Georgia, go ahead.
Thank you. Since coming to this church, I found tremendous joy in my relationship with God and in understanding His allness, provision, and protection, and therefore better understanding my own existence. This has given me a new realization, appreciation, and understanding of true joy as something that I am to work to maintain by handling error daily, rather than work to attain by gaining materially. I no longer find myself experiencing the constant ups and downs that I once did, as the joy that I feel grows more consistent from day to day. This is a feeling that I never would have known if not for the consistent study of the correct teaching of Christian Science in this church. And I'm so grateful for all that I'm finding here. Thank you so much for tonight's meeting and to all for your consistent work.
Thank you. Chardell from Pennsylvania, go ahead.
Good evening. Thank you for this lovely service. Tonight, I would like to express my gratitude to our practitioners here at Plainfield Christian Science Church Independent. They are guiding, teaching, and healing day and night to help us become aware of the omnipotence, omnipresence, and omniscience of our great and everlasting God. This is a consciousness, as I am being taught, the only consciousness. In the past, I would be embarrassed or reluctant to admit wrong thinking or feeling. Well, I now know that if all of this behavior is not rooted out and healed, my well-being and spiritual growth are in jeopardy. Every post on the forum, round tables, and Bible studies are treatments for us and for all mankind. What a privilege as well as a blessing to avail ourselves of such remarkable, exact truths that our practitioners so tirelessly share with us. Because of their understanding of the Bible and the works of Mary Baker Eddy, this church is a mighty fortress of God's love. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, this is Bruce. I was reading on our website some of the articles. And in particular, I was reading this one called God With You, God With Us by Edward Kimball. And one of the sentences that was in there says, "Remember only the good, and you will be communing with God." Well, that's a pretty special thing to think of communing with a God. But also it reminded me of a particular time a couple of years ago when it seemed like I was remembering every bad thing that ever happened in the past. And it seemed like it came to me like it was things happened that was entirely unwarranted and unfair, and it seemed like it was totally reasonable to feel bad about them. You wouldn't believe all the reasons that error, human mind, or wrong thinking will throw at you and appear like it's fully justifiable, but it's not. And I knew I had to get top of this, and I just put my foot down, make a firm resolve that I was going to think the good. I was going to look ahead and not back, because the whole idea of going through life looking in the rearview mirror is like a recipe for a crash, and which is entirely unnecessary. And I made a firm resolve. God, I'm going to stay with you, and I'm going to look forward, and I'm going to listen for your guidance. And the wrong thoughts started backing away. They started getting less aggressive. And one of the things that really capped it off is I think it was pretty around that time in one of our church services, we sang hymn number 238. And one of the phrases in this hymn says, "For all the good the past hath had remains to make our own time glad." And this is a poem by John Greenleaf Whittier that was put to music in our hymnal. And that really gave this tendency to look backward and look at the bad, gave it a big fat zap. And I made an even firmer resolve to look forward and to be God's servant and to give my thoughts to him and think the thoughts that he would give, which are only good. And it made my life much happier. I felt a lot better. And I felt like I was getting closer to God, which is quite a happy, joyous thing. So I'm grateful for that experience, and plus all of the material that we have here in our church, the articles and these hymnals and everything. Oh my gosh, it's a wonderful treasure. I'm very thankful for it. Lil.
I love to see the many ways that God is caring for me. I recently had to contact the post office for an address change. I was directed to go to the main branch and fill out a form. It sounded like it would take a while, and there was talk about holding mail. Well, I filled out the form and left it. Yesterday, when I got home, I was dumping some trash and spotted our mail carrier, whom I haven't seen for a while, and caught up to her and explained my situation. It turns out she is the person who is in charge of handling this process. And she saw my name on the list and sent it along. I couldn't have made contact with a more perfect person for help. Thank God. That was no accident. He knows the people involved. She knows the people involved in this process and will be taking care of my need with the post office. I didn't feel right at first with the post office, but God directed me to the perfect person and is in control of the whole event. I am just so grateful how God worked this situation out. He's always so loving and he's always right there. And thank you for those wonderful readings.
Thank you. Luann from New York, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm very grateful to God for Christian Science. It has brought so much good into my life, of which I'm deeply grateful for. I remember coming out of appointments with my mental health therapist thinking, no, that's not right. This is not right. This is not the answer. I knew there was something more, something better, something true, but I was just not seeing it anywhere. When I came into Christian Science, it felt right away. I thought, this is it. This is what I was looking for, the truth. I feel so deeply blessed by God to have my practitioner support and Mrs. Eddy's key to the scriptures guiding me forward out of the darkness of night. Everything I have learned here has changed how I see the world, how I see myself and others as a child of God, working day after day to keep God first. There's a tremendous healing power in this science, and I'm thankful to be learning to sacrifice and pray for mankind. I'm deeply grateful for everything I've been given. Thank you.
Thank you. Carol.
I was reading some things today in our science literature, and there was one statement that rang a bell with me. It says, I don't remember who wrote it, I didn't write the author's name down, but we will never have more good than we have right now. Right now we have all the good that God is. And I remember finding that years ago, seeing that statement, and it lifted, made me look up and look out and stop looking within and thinking that I was lacking something or I didn't have what I needed. But when we look up and look out, there's all the good that God is, and He's providing for us every minute. I am just so very grateful for this and for all the wonderful statements that we have in Christian Science, and very grateful for help from a practitioner that has taken me through a lot of interesting things. I'm so very grateful, and for all the progress. Thank you.
Thank you. Dale from Virginia, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for the readings and all the testimonies. They're so helpful. I'm very grateful for the practitioners in this church and all the instruction, live and on the website. Last week I called a practitioner here because of not feeling well and under a lot of pressure. We were hosting all our family for several days for Christmas. The practitioner said, the only pressure that we have is to come out from the material world and be separate. That's from Science and Health. It's not an exact quote, but that's what she said. And she asked if I knew what Bicknell Young said was the only thing I had to do today. And it was, all you have to do is know the truth. Keeping the practitioner's words with me, to not go into the human mind, to live only in the present, and only act as God directs. The next morning, as I made preparations for our company, I listened to the link that was sent in the daily email from this church. And after the initial reading, one after another, there were readings from other Wednesday evening meetings of Bible citations and Mrs. Eddy's works. I was so buoyed by listening. The statement from Science and Health came to me. Quote, the way to extract error from mortal mind is to pour in truth through flood tides of love. Unquote. And that's what I felt was happening. The practitioner said to enjoy the weekend and everyone, and I can honestly say it was one of the most harmonious and happy times that we have all spent together. There was a lot of love expressed. It is such a blessing to learn these very practical truths here. And thank you for the most beautiful and holy Christmas Eve service held in this church.
Thank you. Suzanne from Vermont, go ahead.
Good evening. I also would like to thank the church for the beautiful Christmas Eve service that I was able to attend after 14 years of wanting to come in person. It finally happened, and I was there with my husband and his dad, and we all had an amazingly uplifting Christmas Eve service, and we felt like afterwards if we went straight home and we would have had just the perfect celebration of Christmas. We didn't even need to open any gifts, but we did the next day. But it was so incredibly beautiful, and I know so much effort went into it, and I truly appreciate it. I also want to thank the church for, through these years, bringing me so much closer to the Bible and for teaching me practical Christian Science. I realized when I was singing the first hymn tonight about the Holy Bible, book divine, precious treasure thou art mine is how it starts. I had never really felt that way about the Bible before coming to this church, and truly learning more deeply what's in it, and is starting the Bible studies, which I'd always kind of wanted to do at some point in my life, but I mean, I could have waited forever and never delved into it the way I was headed. I'm just so grateful for this church for putting me on the right path of true, practical, and pure Christian Science. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Amanda from Missouri, go ahead.
Thank you. As I was thinking about what to share in tonight's meeting, some comments from a recent Bible study came to thought about how we should write our benefits in marble, our injuries in dust, and not the other way around, and to acknowledge God's work and all that is good. And in thinking about that, so many experiences came to thought of God's goodness and protection, and one in particular came to thought to share tonight. I was a bit surprised at first, as I didn't really want to think about it despite such a good resolution. But with what I'm starting to understand with practitioner help that I am so grateful for, and for this entire church community that I'm also so thankful for, I see and feel now perhaps a bit more clearly God's hand and his good work governing the entire experience that I would like to acknowledge. A few years ago, my mom had called to say that she was taking my dad to be checked out at the hospital just to be cautious due to some discomfort he was having at the time. She wasn't alarmed, but wanted me to know. I was quite fearful by the time I arrived and was not thinking too clearly. What I do recall with the utmost clarity and precision is that as I was walking in, I know I was reaching out to God for anything at that point, and He answered me in a way that I could understand it in that moment. It was a very distinct and a very clear message in words that I could somehow feel that there was no need for this alarm, and that even to the medical picture, everything was actually fine. And everything was fine, but as is often the case when dealing with things such as medical protocols or opinions, they decided they wanted to run another test in the morning just to be sure. I must say, though, that everyone involved in his care was extremely compassionate and kind. I went home to retrieve some things to bring back, including some Christian Science writings that, although at the time I was not actively working in Christian Science, I had still kept handy, and they were ready and waiting for me when I reached for them and needed them. I don't remember the exact words that I read, but what I do well remember is that what I had brought back with me to read was exactly on point for that situation. What I read was comforting and clearly written in a way that could be communicated to someone that may not have much of a background in science. And I was able to read and share many of these ideas with him, to which he was very receptive, and I could tell he found it very comforting, too, as he listened and even nodded in agreement with several points. When he went for this test, I continued to work in the best way that I understood, to feel the presence and protection of God at work right there. It didn't matter where we were if everywhere was holy ground. And I know my mom was doing the same also in the best way of her understanding. When he returned back to the room after the test, he said that all had gone fine, and other than the need to rest up a bit there due to protocol, he would be headed home with no further procedures that had to be done. He then added that he could tell from the doctor's comments that the doctor seemed very surprised, as it seems the doctor had presumed he would need to perform one additional procedure after this test, as it would be expected a routine based on the medical methods of measure. So the doctor had everything with him so he could go ahead and do this procedure. But this additional procedure was not necessary. I am so grateful for the opportunity to acknowledge God's work throughout that experience, for all the good that was demonstrated, and for the developing understanding that it is to expect good. Thank you so much for tonight's service.
Thank you. Mary.
Okay, I have a few things to read tonight. One from Wichita, Kansas. Blessings to all of you who do so much for our church. I thank you all for it lovingly. And then from Maryland, Dear Plainfield Church, a note of thanks for the gift of Mason's Hints of Healing. It is very helpful to me, and I was grateful to have it on my way home from a recent trip. And then Virginia, the beautifully printed article and warm Christmas card was such a surprise. It reflects the love with which it was prepared and touches my heart. The Plainfield family and community reflect such love and caring and good humor in so many ways. Merry Christmas to you all. And then also our church bulletin board, Georgia. Thanks to all for the beautiful Christmas Eve service. The music, carols, and reading selections were all so lovely and heartfelt. After being exposed to Jingle Bell Rock countless times and all the other meaningless so-called Christmas songs while out and about in the stores, it was like a breath of fresh air to hear everyone sing the songs that are truly comforting and express the real meaning of Christ's message. The musicians and singers were wonderful, and the pure voice of Darius, who sang Away at the Manger, was definitely a highlight. In Pennsylvania, I too must offer my joy and gratitude for the Christmas Eve candlelight service. The peace and love expressed in the music and readings went out into the world as well as filling the room that special night. Thank you, Plainfield Church, and glory be to God on high. And then Georgia, beautiful Christmas Eve service. Who is Darius? His singing went straight to the heart. Thanks to everyone. And Darius is a little 6-year-old boy that is the son of Faith, our soloist, and her husband, John. And he certainly has a pure, sweet voice. Thank you so much for our readings tonight. It certainly made it so clear that Christian Science is based on the Bible, on the Scriptures, and Mrs. Eddy's deep love for the Scriptures. Sometimes we hear that we are confused with something called Scientology, and we are not Scientologists. We have nothing to do with Scientology. Christian Science was founded many years ago, and it is based solely on the Bible and the teachings of Christ. I would also like to just mention Joseph. Joseph was speaking about the Queen's speech on Christmas Day and how it sounded like a Christian Science sermon, perhaps. And my understanding is, Melissa, our friend in Australia, had told me that quite some time ago, when the Queen Mother was still with us, and that's Queen Elizabeth's mother, she visited Australia, and I think the town that Melissa lives in, Melbourne, and her entourage went into the Christian Science reading room to purchase literature there. And it is also my understanding, perhaps some of you know the movie The King's Speech that was out, and the fact that the Queen's mother's husband had a very bad stammer, and it was my understanding that his teacher, was a Christian Scientist. If you've seen the movie, it's a beautiful movie, and it tells how the love of this teacher, who was not, authorized, by the way, but it was just a good teacher, how he helped this man. His love helped him overcome that problem. So there is science there in the royal family, and even a touch of the Christ truth can change so many things in one's life, as we all know. In the lesson this week, in the book of Deuteronomy, it states, "Beware that thou forget not the Lord thy God, in not keeping his commandments and his judgments and his statutes, which I command thee this day. And when thy herds and thy flocks multiply, and thy silver and thy gold is multiplied, and all that thou hast is multiplied, then thine heart be lifted up, and thou forget the Lord thy God, which brought thee forth out of the land of Egypt from the house of bondage. And thou say in thine heart, My power and the might of mine hand hath gotten me this wealth. But thou shalt remember the Lord thy God, for it is he that giveth thee power to get wealth, that he may establish his covenant which he sware unto thy fathers, as it is this day." That is a very important point. So many of us come to science with so many great needs, and we have those needs fulfilled, whether it's health or financial problems, emotional problems, relationship problems. They get healed. And perhaps it's easy to become complacent. The Bible says there's always a falling away first. The demands of your job or of your family or other ways that pull you out, and somehow your love and gratitude for God grows weak, grows less. And it's like a drifting. And if you don't catch it, you'll find yourself perhaps back in the same soup where you were in the first place, or even worse. So it is so important that we always remember what God has done for us, how he has brought us out of Egypt, out of that land of bondage. And one thing that is so helpful to those of us here in this church who were taught this, that in sort of discerning as to what way to take or what way to approach or what will be the best thing to do to keep you close to God, you could ask yourself, if you're going to get into a relationship, any kind of a relationship, will this bring me closer to God or take me farther away from it? Your job, a new job, will this bring me closer to God or farther from him? A new home, Will this bring me closer to God or farther from Him? It's a good test to ask yourself, whatever the event coming up might be, will it bring me closer to God? And then, if it does, well, then that's a good thing, and you can rejoice in it. It's God's plan for you. But if you find it drawing yourself away from God and His people, then beware. I'm so grateful for the instruction that we receive here, the sound instruction. It's not all lovey-dovey and nice. Sometimes it can be tough. But in that toughness, there is power and strength and great safety. I'm so grateful to be here tonight with you all.
Thank you.